Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. The Auburn Tigers, their head coach Hugh Freeze, who are coming off of a loss to Arkansas, okay? So this game, and I tweeted it right around halftime. This was at one point probably, bluntly, probably the worst football game I've ever seen, okay? It was terrible. Now, to the credit of Arkansas, they were much better in the second half. This was a game where the two teams combined for, let me make sure that I have these stats correct, okay? So the two teams in this game combined for, I know Auburn had 5 turnovers. Arkansas finished the game with only 2. So 7 turnovers. I believe there were 2 separate instances where we had back-to-back plays that resulted in turnovers. And like I said, there was a moment where I was like, this is the worst football game I've ever seen. Got better. Arkansas wins. They make plays late. Taylon Green had an incredible deep touchdown pass. But the story of the game was the continued struggles at quarterback for Auburn. If you remember, 2 weeks ago against Cal at home, Peyton Thorne, 4 interceptions thrown. Hugh Freeze asked about it after the game, says, look, he's been the best player in practice. It's not easy to replace a guy when he's showing you things in practice that aren't translating to games. And I'm paraphrasing, but that was an important part of what was said. Well, it doesn't matter because last week against New Mexico, they did go to the backup. Hank Brown, he looked good. I just one problem. Hank Brown on Saturday threw 3 interceptions, which means that he was then replaced by Peyton Thorne, who threw another interception of his own. On top of a fumble, there were 5 total interceptions, 5 total turnovers, 4 interceptions, the second game this year where there were 4 interceptions thrown by Auburn quarterbacks. Afterward, Hugh Freeze was asked about it, and he had some comments that basically broke the internet. Producer Matt, play the sound.
And I know that there's people open, and I know that we're running the football. And we got to find a guy that won't throw it to the other team. And we got to find running backs that hold on to it. You know, that's a huge play there. I mean, we're going in to score. I don't know, what was it, 7-0 then? Or so it's 7-7, and our defense gets a stop, and who knows what happens. But, you know, the scheme is what most everybody in the country is running some sort of. But you've got to have good play at quarterback for sure to at whatever system you're going to choose.
So that was what Hugh Freeze said after the Arkansas game. And I think the soundbite that seems to have broken the internet was the part where he said, we have to find a quarterback that doesn't throw the ball to the other team. But of course, because the internet does not like Hugh Freeze, this was the most offensive sound, the most offensive thing that has ever been said in the history of college football. It's proof of a coach that is placing all the blame on his players, taking none of the accountability himself. Shame on Hugh Freeze. He should be banished to the high heavens. Except here's the problem. I don't really see it that way, and I'll be transparent. I don't really see what the big deal was about what Hugh Freeze said, okay? First of all, let's get one thing clear, because this always happens on the internet. Yes, that sound did not sound good. Yes, it does sound like a coach that is blaming his players for everything going wrong and taking none of the blame. Well, if you actually do your homework, and if you actually go back, and if you actually listen to the entire press conference, there were 2 separate instances where Hugh Freeze said, we have to coach these guys better. So don't tell me that Hugh Freeze is taking 0 responsibility, because he did take responsibility. But at the same time, let me ask you a simple question. At what point is he supposed to just, like this argument that he's not supposed to throw his players under the bus? One, I don't think saying we need to find a quarterback that doesn't throw the ball to the other team is throwing your players under the bus when the quarterback is literally throwing the ball to the other team. And so to me, here's my question. What is he supposed to say when he acknowledges that the coaching has to be better? Is he supposed to lie about it? Is he supposed to pretend that everything's okay and that zero responsibility falls on the quarterbacks? Let me just give you an example. First of all, let me just give you an example, right? If you're watching on YouTube, you see a very nice Auburn graphic with a very nice picture of Hugh Freeze that producer Matt spent a lot of time this afternoon putting together. If producer Matt came on this show and we did this segment, and producer Matt had a UConn logo and a Lane Kiffin picture when we're talking about Hugh Freeze and Auburn, and I gave him the specifics and said, hey, we're talking Hugh Freeze. Let's make sure this logo looks good on the final segment of the show. Is it my responsibility that producer Matt put up a UConn logo and a Lane Kiffin picture? Of course not. By the way, the opposite is true as well. If I don't coach him up correctly, if I tell him put a UConn logo and a Lane Kiffin picture, and he does that, and we're talking about Hugh Freeze, that's on me. And so I just bring it up because is he supposed to lie? Is he supposed to pretend that leading the country in interceptions is an acceptable standard for Auburn? And let me even take it a step further than that. Is he the one throwing the football? Like, listen, I understand. Yes, in a perfect world, you want to coach it out of the players, but there's only so much he can do on the sidelines. Remember, this happens to everybody. 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, the year Alabama started the year number 1, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, and everybody said this is a revenge tour. They're going to destroy everybody. They were like 120th in penalties that year. It was a disappointing year. They lost 3 times during the regular season, whatever, twice, I think, in the regular season. They weren't in that 14 playoff, though, okay? And at some point, like, yeah, Nick Saban can take responsibility. We got to coach him up better. But at some point, it's on the players to stop committing dumb penalties. And so I don't understand this thing that Hugh Freeze is not supposed to be transparent about what his players are or are not doing. Let me take it a step further. In the NIL portal era, I really just don't care, and I am very unsympathetic to coaches criticizing players. Now, listen, if he blamed it all on Peyton Thorne and said he's the worst quarterback I've ever seen, and Peyton Thorne threw for 300 yards and he lost on a walk-off field goal, that's different. But this is the NIL portal world. This is a world where these guys are getting paid. We've talked about it with DJU. We've talked about it with other guys. I don't know all of the dynamics of Auburn's NIL setup. Peyton Thorne is probably one of the top 3 or 4 people paid in that building in terms of salary. I know it's not a salary because you can't pay him for a performance, whatever. Peyton Thorne is making a lot of money to be the quarterback of the Auburn Tigers. And once you're a paid, it's not an employee, but you're kind of an employee, I'm very unsympathetic to guys being criticized publicly, okay? Happens in the pros all the time. Caleb Williams, I was watching him against the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday afternoon as I was prepping for this show, threw 2 crushing picks. Now, you could blame a little bit on the play caller. You could blame a little bit on the head coach, Matt Eberflus, but you also have to blame Caleb Williams at some point. Do we not blame him? By the way, I'm from the New York City area. I grew up in Connecticut. I got a ton of friends who are Giants fans. You know when Daniel Jones sucks, who gets the blame for it? It's not Brian Dable. There's nobody running. Oh my God, Brian Dable. He was so mean to Daniel Jones. Go listen to some of the stuff Brian Dable says. He crushes him every single week. Brian Dable has said on multiple occasions, like, this guy isn't good enough to be my quarterback. That's the reality. And so to me, I'm sorry if your feelings are hurt. But guess what? Peyton Thorne's a big boy. If he wants to play in the NFL next year, if Hank Brown wants to play in the NFL, and they all do, you got to be able to deal with criticism, and you got to be able to deal with reality. Finally, let me say this, okay? Because I think there's this perception of it's Freeze's fault because they didn't pursue anybody in the portal. And if you knew these guys weren't good enough, that's on you as the head coach, okay? Well, a couple things. One, if you're not following our Tours on Auburn account, you need to be. Bottom line, I bring it up because the Tours on Auburn account brought up a great point. This is more than just a quarterback issue. But at the same time, there's a couple other variables here. First of all, Auburn did pursue a couple quarterbacks. Riley Leonard is a Alabama native. There was at least talks, would they consider him? I think he was pretty far down the road with Notre Dame. I think there might have been some early Cam Ward communication, but it's not as though they didn't at least have conversations with anybody. That's one. Two, portal quarterbacks don't come in infinite supply. This isn't bread at your grocery store. If your neighbor picks up a loaf of bread, you can just come get in line behind him and pick up another loaf of bread. There's only so many good portal quarterbacks to go around. And so to me, listen, I'm not here to be Hugh Freeze's PR, mouth here. But at the same time, it's like sometimes you want to know the truth. Taking the wrong portal quarterback is actually worse than taking one just for the sake of taking one. How mad do you think Florida State fans are right now that they're spending all this money on DJU? You go on and on down the list. I can't think of everybody. It doesn't have to be a negative DJU conversation. But it's really hard to get a guy out of the portal and have immediate success. By the way, Riley Leonard has not been great for Notre Dame. I think he first 3 games, he didn't throw a touchdown pass. So it's hard to find these guys. This wasn't, this isn't a team that was a quarterback away. Miami was a quarterback away. They couldn't go into this season with whoever they had. They needed somebody else, and Cam Ward has taken them to another level. By the way, Miami's a team we're going to have to talk about during the week because they're awesome. Okay. But Auburn wasn't a quarterback away. So yeah, you could go spend somebody else's money on a guy that you know isn't good enough, or you can allocate those resources elsewhere. You can focus on high school development and recruiting, which Hugh Freeze has done. We've talked about it. Great high school 2024 class headlined by Cam Coleman. I was going to say Cam Ward, but Cam Coleman. 2025 class, as we've discussed, 8 of the top 10 players from the state of Alabama are committed to Auburn. Oh, by the way, on top of that, number 5 class in the country, according to 24/7 Sports. So, like, this notion that it's all Hugh Freeze's fault and that he's not allowed to criticize players, I'm just sorry. I'm not a person. I'm never going to blindly always take the side of the players. When Deion Sanders, remember last year, Deion Sanders was asked, how do you improve the O-line? And he said, you go get another offensive line. And I said, I don't blame Coach Prime for saying that at all. I feel the exact same way about Hugh Freeze. I'm not going to apologize. I don't think he said anything wrong. I don't think he did anything wrong. One thing I do think is wrong, this Auburn quarterback play, it's got to get figured out, and it's got to get figured out quick because they got Oklahoma coming to town this week.